So I got this piece up on the wall now, and if you're interested more in the process and the making of, I have that other longer video, and I did want to say a few more things about this one, if only for my own edification. So let's start with the idea of likeness and faces, okay? You know, they say that the first thing a baby learns to recognize as its brain is developing is, the faces, especially of mom. And I'm wondering, does that really look like me? So here's a photograph I took a few years ago on a project. I was working with a local homeless shelter, and we were doing photographs and writing about them. So this one says, I learned a lot from photography. Every time I take someone's picture, it's like looking into a mirror. I learn a lot about the other person and a lot about myself. Every portrait is a self-portrait. So I guess I have done self-portraits before, just not in the painting medium. So the question is, does that really look like me? Well, I don't know, kind of, yeah, I guess. But what's interesting to me is the expression. The expression to me suggests, like you ever watch those videos on Instagram where the people go to the dog shelter and they find a little dog that's been there for, like 5 years and nobody's adopted it. And the dog comes out of the cage and his expression, especially the eyes say like, oh, hey, won't you be my friend? Won't you take me home? That's kind of like what that expression says to me. But what's interesting, I'm going to put this back on the stand so I can say this. What's interesting to me about that is I have no technical understanding of how to paint an expression. I've never been trained in any kind of drawing or painting, and I didn't do that intentionally. I wouldn't know how to paint an expression on something, somebody, a dog, whatever, that said, happy, sad, take me home, any of that shit. And so I wonder where that comes from. My only explanation for it is that that's what happened when I had the brush in my hand, And what's fascinating to me is how some people have an innate ability to draw and to be able to express things like that. Reminds me of a story. My wife is an example of that. Okay, one time about literally 40 years ago when she and I first got together, we're sitting watching a local TV show, and the guy that was on there, some kind of goofy show, I don't remember, like a kid's show or something, and he says, oh, we're going to have a caricature contest. Draw a caricature of me, the host of the show, and send it in, and we'll see who can win the contest. And my wife and I are sitting there, and I'm not really paying attention. She says, I'll bet I can win that contest. Now, I had never seen her draw a picture before. We'd known each other for over a year, but drawing wasn't something that she did, and she's not an artist today. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, go ahead. And then I did something else. So she went and got a piece of paper and a pencil, and she's working on it for about 15 minutes. Now, the show was off, okay? So the guy was no longer on screen. And from memory, she drew a caricature of this guy that was uncanny. I couldn't believe it. And no revisions, no nothing. She just drew it. She sent it in. She won the contest. I had a friend of mine, Ralph, in 6th grade, who was like that too. He could draw unbelievably well and copy cartoons, make pictures. I don't know. I always tried to get him to draw pictures of naked girls, but he wouldn't do that. And a few years later, I found out why. But besides that, I also had another student when I was teaching high school who was like a human Xerox machine. I was having kids in a world cultures class try to rough out a map of China because we were studying, Chinese culture and so forth like that. And he could sit there and draw, and it was unbelievably photographic the way he could do this. Now that young man, he later went on to become an architect from what I understand. I'm sure he was very successful. My friend Ralph, the last I heard from him, he got into politics, and he was involved with some kind of Republican campaign down in Florida. He wrote to me and asked me for a contribution. Well, sorry, Ralph, good luck with that. But So that's the one thing about likenesses in this piece that I find very interesting. And just to follow up on my wife, to this day, I've never seen her draw another picture again. There's no interest in doing that, even though she has the ability. So that brings to mind a lot of interesting thoughts about, people who have the ability to do something, but they don't do it. I used to know kids in school when I was coaching who had tremendous athletic ability, but they just didn't have a motivation to do it. And then, it brings up the question, well, should you do something just because you can? And that can bring up a lot of moral issues. If you think about politics, you think about economics, you think about people conning people or whatever. But that's interesting. And then the converse of that is something that I think about as well. I don't have the ability to do that, and yet I'm motivated to try to do it. So where does that come from? There's one thing, should you do something just because you can? Well, I'm convinced no, not always. But on the other hand, you might ask the question, well, why the fuck are you trying to draw and paint stuff, Bill? Because you don't have any ability. And yet I want to do it. So either way, I'm going to keep doing it. The other thing about this expression that's interesting to me is that's not my normal demeanor. That's not the way I come across to people with that type of let's call it a longing look. That's not the way I present myself, and I don't think I ever did that when I was a kid. Even during the years like in the teen times, when you're like 12, 13 and up, when you're trying to, impress new people, meet new people, everybody's got sort of a different approach tactic, and mine was not that. I always tried to be the, like the cool guy. So I don't know where that expression comes from, except to say I just created the expression that I was physically capable of doing. And, maybe some woo-woo kind of people would say, oh, that came out from your subconscious. I don't believe that shit, sorry. So, okay, that's enough of that. Let's look at some other aspects of this self-portrait. In terms of, let's call it the distribution of the pieces around the main physical body there, this kind of stuff and moving just sort of slowly down around. I ended up being pretty happy with that, and I had to fill in a little bit at the end with these stamps and that piece. That's another stamp there, but the main pieces seem to fill up the space well enough, and I've gotten pretty good at that kind of thing because I was taught photographic and visual composition by one of the best people in the world, Larry Fink, and I got a feel for that. So that comes, it's a decision-making process, and a lot of times it involves a lot of revision. This painting over here, one of the earlier ones that I did back during the winter, my painting of Illinois, drones and tornadoes over Illinois, that was a real fun one to do because it involved a lot of spatial considerations and balancing things out. And it occurred to me that maybe I should work on just doing some more like pure paintings. This was one that I made when I was staying with my mom for the last couple months of her life, as was this one. I don't know if we want to read any metaphor into that or not. It doesn't matter. But anyway, these pieces, they're just paint. There's nothing painted or glued onto them as there are with these more mixed media pieces. And it occurs to me, well, maybe you should just make some paintings, pure paintings, Bill, and learn how to handle paint better. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but anyway, I'm pretty satisfied with the way the distribution around the body came out. And so now let's just kind of zoom in to wrap this up and talk a little bit about that narrative that I worked in there with the pen. I'm just going to walk up and read this because if I try to hold the camera here for that long, I know it's going to shake and be terrible. Okay, so it starts up here. It says November 27th, 1955, 7:13 p.m., Greenville Hospital, Jersey City, New Jersey. Hello, Nice to meet you all. I wasn't expecting this. 1955, Wegman Parkway, Jersey City, briefly. Then 358 East Westfield Avenue, Roselle Park, 1956, 1957. Route 209, Broadheadsville, across from the A&P, 1958 to 1973. I liked it there. 1973, 1173 Hardwick Hall, Temple University, North Broad Street, Philadelphia, PA. Kind of liked it there, but immature and didn't have a direction. Back to Broadheadsville, 1975 to 1980. Then Mountain Road Readers, 1980-82. Oh, I forgot. South 11th Street, Philadelphia, PA, 1979, until I got robbed. My apartment got robbed. In retrospect, it was a very good thing. Got me out of Philadelphia. I read a great deal during that time, and then moved to 710 Mary's Lane, Bartonsville, for 17 years until 2000. Now at 350 Poplar Valley Road West. It used to be 1438, but the county changed everything, I think, because of 9/11. This is my second favorite place in the world, Broadheadsville being the first, but this is by far the nicest I've ever lived, and happens to be where I'm writing this, my favorite location. This selfie is one of a series of paintings I've made while I'm here. I don't have the slightest idea what they mean or why I make them. My motto, kind of, is I paint like it doesn't matter because it doesn't. That said, it sure is fun to make them. Even though my mood varies a lot from day to day. Sometimes it's light, sometimes it's melancholy. I always enjoy working with the materials, not trying to say anything too specific, and certainly not anything important. But the fuck did I say there? I don't try too hard to understand art. I just try to witness it, if that makes any sense. I've always enjoyed looking at things. And up here, then it continues, I said, while I think of it, I'd like to thank my Uncle Joe, pictured here below, who was a gifted and talented creative guy. I think he was the one who, to me, embodied the idea of creating things just for the enjoyment of doing it. To me, a successful painting is one that I finish. Sometimes that takes years, because I have no schedule, no deadline, and most importantly, no audience. April 2025. And here's a special bonus joke you get along with this presentation. It's my favorite joke. What do you get when you cross an insomniac, an agnostic, and a dyslexic? You get a person who lies awake at night wondering whether there's a dog. Thanks for watching.